Here we're looking at into the tail cone from the cabin of a 114B with air conditioning. You can see the preparations we've made for access. The gangplank is installed using a cross beam in the aft cone to support it, keep the mechanic's weight up off the autopilot servos. At this point we have unsafetied the rudder turnbuckles and, as is our practice, installed the orange flag tape.
On this side?
The dorsal fairing has been removed. For 114B model, we're removing the original equipment, stab root fairings, using a specially prepared putty knife, thinned down to about 10/1000ths on the leading edge. See, the putty knife is used to break free the sealant so that the fairings can be removed. The rudder cap has been removed to prepare for removing the rudder. The stinger has been removed. In preparation for receiving the surfaces, the SuperStream support stands have been placed just outboard of the horizontal stab. In preparation for removing the rudder control cables have been detached from the horn, and a special jig has been put in place to retain those so that the cables will not slack enough to become tangled or to jump their pulleys. It takes two mechanics to safely remove a Commander rudder. At this point I'm holding the rudder, Tony is removing the bottom hinge bolt. While I continue supporting the rudder from beneath, Tony is now pulling the top hinge bolt.
Okay.
Tony is removing that upper bolt by gaining access through the lightning hole in the rudder top rib. Hence, we had removed the rudder cap in preparation.
Okay.
Okay. At this point, we'll store the rudder using the provisions we've made on one of the support stands. Here we're making preparations to store this rudder on our stands. On some rudders you'll find that the tooling hole on the lower surface of the upper rib is not drilled through, so Tony will show you here that we would drill this through on a B model rudder. This procedure leaves ample edge distance in all respects. So we'll now go store this rudder on the stands. So we're now hanging the rudder using the provisions on the support stand. And safety strap for wind protection. Commander elevators on most airplanes it would not be possible to pull the trim rod attaching bolt until the mid-hinge bolt has been pulled and the elevator has been slightly backed away from the stab. We're now pulling the left elevator. I'm supporting the elevator tip while Tony pulls the outboard hinge bolt. Now he's moved to the mid-hinge bolt. In the circumstance you find the bolts corroded or seized in the bushings, call for advice. Now we'll demonstrate the proper maneuver. So I'm pulling the tip aftward away from the stab, and then the whole elevator is coming outboard off the center fitting. And that's it. Before removing the upper fin and before raising the horizontal stab onto the support stands, we're checking each of the empennage hinge positions to try and assess what refurbishment may be necessary. Strap rivets now being drilled out, 3 of them being easily viewed from the inside of the lower fin forward spar channel, and the 4th, I'll show you from this side, the 4th being viewable only through the stab attaching bolt access hole. Prior to removing the upper fin, the aft attachment bolts have been removed. The fairings were previously removed, and the forward attach bolts have been removed. The straps have been de-riveted at 4 places, both sides. The upper fin storage box has been put in place on the upper aft tail cone. The antenna, beacon, and any other wiring that may run down this lower fin forward spar channel has been freed from any clips. Generally, this wiring can be left attached and it will simply follow the upper fin as the upper fin goes into the storage box.
Ready?
So the upper fin is removed by being lifted at the back and then worked backward to work the straps out in the front, and then as the wires come taut, you can begin tilting up, taking it right overhead and right, watching the wires right into the storage box. We're now securing the upper fin as it sits in its storage box. We're securing it with a rope. Down around the tail cone and up the other side. This is just for wind protection, hangar doors open, similar situations. Here we see the upper fin resting in its storage box with the safety rope down around the bottom of the tail. Preparing to remove the horizontal stab, we have removed the 4 aft attaching bolts. The next step would be to remove the forward stab attach bolts and then allow the stab to rest downward to provide better clearance for drilling out the straps which attach the upper fin skins to the lower fin skins. In preparation for raising the horizontal stabilizer, we previously disconnected the push tube We'll extract it. We previously unbolted the 4 aft attaching bolts. We have previously removed the forward stab attaching bolts. Important to note that on some airplanes, the clearance between the inner stab leading edge skin and the lower fin skin may be very tight, so tight as to cause damage to one or the other when raising the stab. If you don't have 1/8 of an inch of clearance or so, it's appropriate to take action to create clearance or be extremely careful in raising the stab. In further preparation for raising the horizontal stabilizer, the trim cables, both cables, have been disconnected mid-tail with the forward ends safetied back to prevent those forward cables from going slack, and the pair of cables coming down through the fin can be slack and are looped here at the moment, and you'll see how we handle this at the moment and in a moment. But they're going to basically be pulled upward and continue right up with the stab as it's raised. Raising the horizontal stabilizer onto the storage stands. Okay, this process takes 3 people. The elevators can be left attached, or they may have been removed if the elevators are going to be inspected or getting any work independent of the SuperStreaming process. In this case, the elevators have already been removed. Makes the stab a little bit lighter and easier to raise. So the 2 of us are going to carefully nurse the forward skins out and free. At the same time, you saw that we rotated up the aft of the stab and then drew back to pull the forward skins away from the fin fitting. Now we're continuing up while our assistant brings one of the stands in. There, good. We like to come in so that the next to outboard rivet line is where the stab load is being taken. Now the other stand is in place. You can see that the trim cables came right up with us. If there was any interference there, it might be helpful to have a 4th person who's helping to guide the trim cables if they didn't just want to pull right up through the fin easily. So minimum 3 staff, maybe better to have 4. Now I'll give you a walk around here to see that the stab is extending through the support about a foot into that first, or actually second, rivet line. Same on the other side. And Tony is at this point installing safety ropes. Here's the safety rope tying off this side to the stand, and symmetrically for the opposite side. The trim cables can just be left to dangle. And you see that the stands, the height of the stands has been designed such that the trim cables are nearly pulled to the pulleys just inside the bulkhead here, but with a little bit of clearance left.
not want them to go through.
The pulleys have been safety wired together and down to the tail stand to prevent them from accidentally pulling up through, unthreading from those pulleys and causing more work on the reinstallation. At this point, the stab has been raised, the upper fin has been placed in its storage box, and the work of SuperStream installation is ready to proceed. On this very late model 114B, we find that there is a factory installed doubler plate already present on the fin forward fitting. That we don't expect will change our process, although we'll be careful with fastener lengths to make sure that the added thickness is not a problem. This would have been installed by the factory because they knew they had a fit problem, a pitch distance problem from the forward attach to the aft attach, and this was their process of shimming that out. At this stage, before SuperStream work begins, it would be appropriate to inspect the lower fin rib. This is the rib affected by the service bulletin. In a late model, we find that a doubled assembly is already in place. This would be a good time to inspect it thoroughly, including an inspection from below with a mirror and good lighting, looking up at the attachment of the forward flange of the rib to the forward fitting, and also including careful inspection of the aft stab attach angles, which extend down inside the lower fin, looking very carefully at all of those rivets. Those rivet lines can also be viewed externally. Go about halfway down here, making sure there's no sign of smoke. It's also appropriate to give these angles a good tap and jiggle and make sure, in particular, that there's been no shearing of the rivets, particularly down inside the fin. We have found aircraft with sheared angles. The rivets, in fact, looked quite good, but were in fact sheared from the rib level all the way down to the end of the angle. Looking at the bottom of the upper fin as it sits in its support box on the tail, you see a typical chafe spot right along here where the stab attach fitting outer edge has chafed. We also see the signs of the chafe. We see the signs of the chafe here on the outside corner of the angle. It's appropriate to take that sharpness off so that the progression of that chafing can be stopped. Here we've set the Aerodyme drill guide in place on the stab forward attach fitting. Note that the doubler seen here is not the Aerodyme doubler to be installed. This is a pre-existing spacer which may be found on some specimen aircraft. With the drill guide in place and secured in position on the existing 2 bolt holes through the fitting, we proceed to drill in 5 places. We are through drilling any doubler that might exist from the factory and through the 50 thousandths fitting itself. at this same stage, we're trimming away the excess fin skin by extending this line upward, and then a quick little shop template coming in at the radius and drawing the line across to know the top of the cut. Okay, so now we have the outline of the cut we want to make, and we make it wide, so then we have the rough piece of skin removed, and then we file that corner in for a nice radius. This is a 7/32 chainsaw file, and we're matching up, coming across the radius, and then just finishing up the edges. So these create the additional space for the stab forward to raise up the essence of the SuperStream modification. Here we see the Aerodyme stab forward attach doubler bolted into place, 3 positions. The upper holes are where the stab will now attach in its raised position. The Aerodyme stab forward attach doubler is installed by inserting the 3 attaching bolts through the relief holes in the lower fin forward spar. Here we've lowered the horizontal stab back onto the stub fin. We have inserted the forward attach bolts through the relief holes or access holes in the stub fin forward spar, and brain block.
Started them.
And started those bolts into the receiving nut plates on the stab. Then we have gone aft and inserted 2 of the bolts which attach the stab to the aft fitting, and these are in place so that we can lift the aft spar of the stab up into its normal position. These bolts are just for riding. The stab will ride on these bolts, maintaining proper aft position as we draw the front attachment up to snug. With the aft bolts in place, we torque the forward attach bolts to pull the stab into its fully forward installed position. The next step is to measure the gaps for which the shims will be fabricated to compensate. The upper gaps, here illustrated checking the gap on the right, is by inserting a feeler gauge down between the attach fitting angle and the stab spar, inserting the gauge far enough that it touches the bolt and noting that gap. The lower gap can be measured using wire gauges, feeling in between, feeling the gap between the forward face of the spar and the aft face of the fitting, or can be measured using flat gauges, but in this case the selected gauge will only begin entering, how am I going to say that? Go ahead and stick it in there again. Summary: before lowering the horizontal stabilizer back onto the stub fin, we had checked the fit of the doubler plate on the stabilizer forward spar. We had drilled the forward attach fitting using the provided drill guide. We had then bolted the forward attach doubler into place, and we had relieved the skins, the fin skins, to allow the stab to sit in its new position. At this point, we're ready to lower the horizontal stab back into its normal position. At this point, we're ready to lower the horizontal stab back into position on the stub fin. Preparation for lowering the horizontal stab back into position on the stub fin. We're first untying the safety straps, safety ropes. Now grasping the stab and taking its weight off the stands, so that our assistant can pull the stands outboard. Then our assistant will go to the tail bulkhead area and guide the trim cables downward, pulling them gently downward as we lower the stab. I'm going to first set the stab in position at the forward fitting, but not too far forward, so that the aft joint can also come together. Trimming the skin lap on the upper fin. Since the forward attachment of the horizontal stab has been raised, it's necessary to trim the skin lap along the the lower extremity of the fin skin to allow the stab to come up into that new position. Trimming the upper fin skin overlap. The first step is to mark for an initial rough cut. We've done this by marking a point along the skin edge, approximately halfway along forward aft. We've marked here. We've gone down and marked an ED circle around this attachment rivet. We've marked an ED circle around this rivet hole. These ED circles are marked at 3/10 of an inch. We've then drawn a line, a straight line, from this skin midpoint down a long tangent to this ED circle as marked, and then continuing. And then the blending of this line to the further ED circle is at an approximate 70-degree angle, as you see here. In preparing to trim the upper fin skin, you see that we've draped the airplane in the area where our cutters might throw aluminum chips. In particular, we don't want any chips getting down into the fuselage through the wiring. In particular, we don't want any aluminum or grit getting down into the fuselage, autopilot systems and so forth, through the wiring ports in the upper fuselage skin. We're laying the upper fin horizontally now on top of the storage box to prepare for the trimming. Okay, the trimming is a two-person operation with an assistant helping to hold the fin in a stable position on top of the storage box while the skin is trimmed. As you see, we prefer the Dremel tool with the small cutting disc. When trimming the fin skin, we find it easiest, after having done the one side, to flip the fin the other way up for purposes of trimming the other side. So therefore you can be trimming along the marked line while looking directly down at it. This will be most clear. So at this point we're going to do our first trial installation of the upper fin after having trimmed the skins. Okay, the idea here is for me to slip the forward straps into the sandwich, and then my assistant is raising the aft end to see if we can slip down into the sandwich, which is negative at this cut.
Yeah, this side's up.
Yeah, it's definitely here, I think. Right?
Where there starts. That's
He's going. Okay. All right. Let me go take a picture of that. Okay, we can see that the forward left-hand side would be willing to slip down into position, but the forward right-hand side is still too tight right here. So I'm going to mark for the additional relief. I have now marked for the additional relief. We've now sufficiently trimmed in those forward corners so that the upper fin has basically slid down into the sandwich. However, it has not slid quite far enough, and that's because it has grounded out along a certain portion, making contact with the stab upper fin, making contact with the upper fin of the stab on both sides. In preparing to mark for this additional trimming, we've put a run of blue tape so that we don't inadvertently mark on the cosmetic portions of the stab skin. So now I'm approaching here with my Sharpie marker. I'm going to maintain a constant altitude. Okay.
Besides the rivets.
Yeah. Now using a fat point Sharpie to mark along additional trim line. And here we've marked the left side for a similar trim. So we're now back in position with the fin back on top of the storage box for doing this additional trim as marked. Here we're dressing and deburring the newly cut edge to avoid injury and inadvertent scraping or scratching of the airplane. After the second trim, we've set the fin back in place. You now may be able to see that we do have positive clearance there, fin skin to stab skin on both sides. But for final evaluation, it's necessary to put the bolts in place and to draw the fin, because it draws upward on a 45-degree angle. It does draw somewhat forward and somewhat upward, so we need to bring those bolts up to torque for a final clearance evaluation. With the upper fin forward attach bolts now up to torque, closing the attachment sandwich, I've marked for just a bit of additional trim at this rivet head to make sure we have positive clearance at that point. Everywhere else we look good. We are looking for a bare minimum of positive clearance everywhere, and probably the target when possible would be a gap of clearance gap of 40 thousandths. Would be a clearance gap of not less than 40 thousandths. For final evaluation of clearance between the fin and stab skins and structure, we've drawn the upper fin forward attach bolts up to torque, pulling that sandwich closed. That pulls the upper fin forward and upward just a bit. At the same time, we have the stab bolts in position to assert the proper vertical position of the aft fin. With the fin skin now trimmed, we've returned the upper fin to its storage box while we move on with other finalizations in the stab attach. At this point, the aft stab attach forward shims, gray in color primer, have been put in position. riding on temporary installation of the upper attach bolts. In preparation for reinstallation of the upper fin, the elevator push tube has been placed back into position down through the stub fin and fuselage. Before reinstallation of the upper fin, it's a good time to check for clearance. The push tube at the stab, with the push tube in place, connected to the elevator horn weldment assembly, checking for clearance where the tube passes through the upper fin rib at all elevator positions. Here we see the upper fin being reinstalled after the trimming. Good technique with the upper fin. Slip the forward straps down into the sandwich. Set the forward attaching bolts in place, but do not torque them up. Do not even bring them snug. Just start them in so that you know they are winding in properly. And then back to the aft attach to put that hardware in position. And then back to the forward to pull the forward up snug. Back to the aft to snug the aft. And then torquing, final torque forward and aft. We note also that the stab is unbolted forward and is its fully relaxed downward position for access to the strap rivets, which will be reinstalled shortly. At this time, the horizontal stab and upper fin have been fully structurally reinstalled. We see the forward attaching bolts for the horizontal stabilizer, their large area washers installed, torqued, and torque sealed. We see the attaching bolts and washers torqued and torque sealed for the upper fin forward attach. We see the antenna and beacon wiring returned to its cable clips and dressed down through the ports in the fuselage skin. We see the upper fin forward strap rivets have been reinstalled 4 places. The view of the same 3 rivets on the other side, with the one formed head being invisible and viewable only using a small mirror through the left hand or through the appropriate access opening in the stub fin forward spar. We see that the horizontal stabilizer aft shims have been installed. The attaching bolts, the aft attaching bolts for the stabilizer having been installed, nutted, torqued, torque sealed in all 4 locations, upper and lower, left and right. We see that the upper fin aft spar, aft attaching bolts have been secured. We see the upper fin aft attach bolts have been inserted, nutted, torqued, torque sealed. Important to note that the sandwich, difficult for the camera to view, the sandwich formed by the upper fin spar doubler and the stab attach fitting rising from the stub fin, this sandwich should be carefully checked to make sure it's in full compression. checks at this stage would be for proper thread penetration of the stab forward attaching bolts through the nut plates. 3 or 4 threads of penetration would be considered normal. On any specimen with a factory doubler in the sandwich along with the Aerodyme forward attached doubler, it may be necessary to go to a longer length on the forward attached bolts. The penetration of the forward attached bolts can be viewed directly in through one of the aft lightning holes in the horizontal stab aft spar. We can view forward through the elevator push tube and horn operation relief in the upper fin aft spar doubler and spar. We can view forward and see the thread penetration for the upper fin forward attaching bolts. Three or 4 threads of penetration would be considered normal. Work stages. At this point, the horizontal stabilizer has been reattached and torqued forward and aft. The vertical fin has been reinstalled and torqued forward and aft. Aside from reinstalling the elevators on this particular specimen, the structural undertaking is complete. We'll move on now to fit and trim for the new fiberglass root fairings. Inspections. At completion of the reinstallation of the horizontal stabilizer and upper fin, it's important to view the attachment sandwich as seen here between the horizontal stab, forward spar, and the lower fin forward attach fitting. We're looking for a tight sandwich between the members, and likewise a tight sandwich between the members on the other side. It's difficult for the camera to show you this sandwich because of the different widths of the members, but it is possible to view closely and well lit and determine that the sandwich is tight at these locations. It's also important to view the attachment sandwich looking up through the aft inboard spar opening. Here we see the sandwich formed by the stab attach fitting, the stab aft spar, and the streamlining tapered shim which has been installed between those members. It's also possible in this fashion, likewise here viewing the aft attachment sandwich on the right-hand side of the tail. Here showing use of your mirror and light to view the attachment sandwich of the upper fin aft attach to the aft fitting.